Welcome back, everybody. We've got some really fascinating sources to dive into today about addiction recovery.
Yeah, this is going to be
It
interesting.
looks like our listener sent in a real mix of stuff, articles, some excerpts from books.
Even a YouTube video I saw.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And they all seem to point to this idea that recovering from addiction isn't just about, getting sober, but it can lead to some pretty amazing personal growth.
Yeah, it really can. And I think that's what's so hopeful about it,
Yeah.
Because it kind of reframes the whole experience.
Right. Like it's not just about what you lose, it's what you can gain.
Exactly.
And, one of the sources even made this analogy to a forest fire.
Okay.
As destructive as a fire can be, it can also create the conditions for new life to emerge.
Right. And that's such a powerful image, isn't it? Because, nobody wants addiction, but
Right.
the process of recovery, like you said, it can be this catalyst for change and growth.
Yeah, so let's dig into that. One of the first things that jumped out at me was this term, addiction-related growth. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's interesting because research is actually showing that people in recovery, they often report not just the negative things you might expect, like PTSD, but they also talk about these positive changes. They call it addiction-related growth.
So it's not just about the absence of the addiction, it's about positive changes that come out of that experience.
Right, and I think that's what makes it so fascinating, because it suggests that going through something really difficult, like addiction, can actually lead to growth in ways that you might not expect.
So is this unique to addiction, or could it be a type of post-traumatic growth, like the kind of thing that people experience after other kinds of adversity?
That's a great question. And it's interesting because research suggests that this kind of growth can emerge from all sorts of difficult experiences. It could be overcoming a serious illness, surviving a natural disaster, even like a really difficult divorce. These events, they can force us to reevaluate our priorities, face our fears, and ultimately discover new meaning and purpose.
So it's almost like it's not so much about the event itself, but about how we choose to respond to it.
Exactly. And I think that's where the real power lies. It's in our ability to choose how we're going to make meaning of these experiences.
Okay, so you keep mentioning meaning making. One of the sources actually defines meaning making as the process of how people understand and make sense of life events, relationships, and the self. And it sounds like this is really crucial in recovery, right?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the sources even included this quote from Marcus Aurelius that really stuck with me. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts.
Oh, I love that quote.
Me too. And it's so relevant,
Yeah.
especially in addiction recovery, because it highlights the power of our minds to shape our experiences.
Right. So it's not just about changing our behaviors, it's about changing our thinking.
Exactly. And that's where meaning making comes in. It's about figuring out, why did this happen? Who am I now? What really matters to me? It's about examining your habits, your beliefs, your whole way of life.
It sounds like a really profound process of self-discovery.
Oh, it is. It's about uncovering who you are at your core, what your values are, and what you want your life to stand for. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about recovery. It forces you to do that kind of deep inner work.
One of the sources even talked about Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust.
Yes.
And they talked about how his experiences led him to develop something called logotherapy. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So logotherapy basically revolves around the idea that our primary drive in life is not actually pleasure, but meaning. Frankl believed that even in the face of incredible suffering, humans have this innate need to find meaning and purpose. And I think that's such a powerful concept, especially when we think about addiction recovery.
Okay, so how does logotherapy connect to addiction recovery? Is it about finding meaning in sobriety or...
It's more about understanding that addiction itself can be a misguided attempt to find meaning. It's a way of coping with pain or numbing out from difficult emotions or filling a void.
So you're saying that instead of focusing on just avoiding the substance, maybe we need to be asking, what is this person trying to achieve through their addiction? What needs are they trying to meet? And how can we help them meet those needs in healthier ways?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Logotherapy, it really reframes the whole conversation. It's not about demonizing the addiction, but about understanding the deeper human need that's driving that behavior.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about how we approach treatment and recovery. There's so much emphasis on willpower and avoiding triggers. But maybe we need to focus more on helping people find meaning and purpose in their lives.
I think that's a crucial shift in perspective. And the cool thing is we're starting to see more and more treatment centers embrace this approach. They're incorporating things like mindfulness, yoga, even art therapy into their programs.
So it's more of a holistic approach.
Exactly. Because true recovery, it's not just about stopping the substance use, it's about addressing the underlying issues, healing from past traumas, and building a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling.
All right, so we've talked about this concept of post-traumatic growth and the power of meaning-making in recovery. But how does this process of change actually unfold? One of the sources mentioned the stages of change model. Is that what they were referring to?
Yes. The stages of change model, also known as the trans-theoretical model, it was developed by Prochaska and Di Clemente, and it basically outlines the different stages that people typically go through when they're making any kind of significant behavioral change. And it's often applied to addiction recovery.
Okay, I think I remember reading about this in one of the articles. It's not a linear process, though, right?
Mhm.
People don't just move neatly from one stage to the
You
next.
got it. It's definitely not a straight line. It's more like navigating a winding path,
Yeah.
with twists and turns and sometimes even steps backward. But the model helps us understand those different stages and what people need at each stage to move forward.
One of the things that stood out to me was this term, evaluative insight processes. And I have to admit, when I read that, I was like, what does that even mean?
Right. Well, it sounds really complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. It's basically about developing self-awareness,
Okay.
being able to reflect on your experiences, see the patterns in your behavior, and get a deeper understanding of what's driving your choices.
So it's about connecting the dots between your thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Exactly. And that's where mindfulness comes in.
Ah, mindfulness. I knew that was coming. It seems like mindfulness is everywhere these days. But what does it actually mean in the context of addiction recovery?
Well, in the context of addiction recovery, it's about learning to observe your thoughts and emotions without judgment. It's about creating that space between a craving and an action so you can make a conscious choice rather than just reacting automatically.
It's like hitting the pause button on autopilot.
Exactly. And that pause can be incredibly powerful. It gives you the chance to step back, assess the situation, and choose a response that's in line with your recovery goals.
And one of the sources actually mentioned the 5 rules of recovery as a practical framework for navigating that process.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about those?
Sure. So the 5 rules are: change your life, be completely honest, ask for help, practice self-care, and don't bend the rules. They're simple, but they're super powerful because they emphasize the importance of making those fundamental changes to your life that are necessary for lasting recovery.
So let's break those down a little bit. The first one, change your life, seems pretty self-explanatory. But what does that actually look like in practice?
It sounds obvious, but it's really about recognizing that recovery requires more than just stopping the substance use. You have to make those big changes to your habits, your routines, maybe even your social circles to create an environment that supports your sobriety.
Makes sense. Okay, what about the second rule? Be completely honest. Why is honesty so important in recovery?
Honesty, it's really the foundation for everything else. It's about being truthful with yourself and others, about the challenges of addiction, about your struggles, about what you need. It's about building that trust and accountability that's so crucial for recovery.
The third rule is ask for help. And I feel like that can be really tough for a lot of people, especially those who are used to kind of going it alone. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really common to want to handle things on your own, but recovery, it's not a solo journey. It's about recognizing that you don't have to do this alone. There's so much strength in reaching out for support, whether it's from friends, family, therapists, support groups, whatever works for you.
I'm guessing the fourth rule, practice self-care, ties into that.
Absolutely. Self-care is essential for building that resilience, managing stress, and maintaining that healthy balance in your life. It's about prioritizing your physical, emotional, and mental well-being. It's about recognizing that you deserve to be taken care of.
Okay, and finally we have don't bend the rules. That sounds a little bit strict, doesn't it?
It might sound strict, but it's about recognizing that even those small compromises, they can really put your recovery at risk. It's about understanding that consistency is key, and staying true to your recovery goals requires that discipline and commitment.
So it's about setting those boundaries and sticking to them.
Exactly. It's about creating that structure and that accountability that will support you in your long-term recovery.
Right, so those 5 rules, they really provide a kind of roadmap, right?
Yeah.
For navigating the ups and downs of recovery. They emphasize that personal responsibility, building that support system, and making those choices that are aligned with your values and goals.
That's a great way to put it. It's about taking an active role in your healing and creating a life that feels authentic and fulfilling.
Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, that whole person approach to recovery. One of the sources, the Aspen Intervention Wellness Center, they seem to really emphasize this. What did you find interesting about their approach?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because Aspen Intervention, they're not alone in this. More and more treatment centers are recognizing that addiction isn't just a physical or a mental health issue. It really affects the whole person.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does that actually mean in practice? Like, how do they address the whole person?
Well, it means recognizing that addiction is a biopsychosocial spiritual issue.
Whoa. Okay, lots of big words there.
Yeah, I know, right?
But essentially what you're saying is that it affects every aspect of a person's life.
Exactly. And so treatment needs to address all those different levels, the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual, because they're all interconnected.
Okay, so can you give me some specific examples of how that plays out? Like in a treatment setting, what does that look like?
Sure. So Aspen Intervention, for instance, they incorporate all sorts of different holistic practices into their program. Things like yoga, tai chi, mindfulness meditation. They even have equine therapy.
Equine therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's working with horses.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So it's not just about talking about your problems and therapy.
Nope. It's about engaging in activities that help you heal on a deeper level.
I like that. So it's about giving people a wider range of tools and resources to support their recovery.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to take control of their well-being.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've covered a lot of ground already, from post-traumatic growth to meaning-making, logotherapy, the stages of change model, the 5 rules of recovery, and now this whole person approach to healing. I'm excited to see what other insights we uncover as we continue our deep dive today.
Me too. There's so much more to explore. It's fascinating how this whole person approach really ties back to what we were discussing before about Viktor Frankl and logotherapy.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's like they both emphasize that there's this deeper need driving the addiction, like a search for meaning that's just kind of gone off track.
Exactly. Remember, Frankl believed that our primary drive is to find meaning, and that addiction can be seen as this, like a misguided attempt to fulfill that need.
So it's like instead of just stopping the substance, use the focus shifts to helping people discover healthier, more sustainable ways to find meaning and purpose in their lives.
Yeah, and like you mentioned before, Aspen Intervention Wellness Center, they seem to really get that. They incorporate all these different practices, mindfulness, yoga, tai chi, even positive psychology.
I was really intrigued by that equine therapy you mentioned. I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive that interacting with horses could actually be helpful for addiction recovery.
Yeah, it might sound a little strange at first, but it can be really powerful. Horses are so intuitive, they can really pick up on our emotional states. And so in equine therapy, individuals, they work with horses in a way that helps them develop that self-awareness, build trust, and learn how to regulate their emotions.
So it's not about like, riding the horses.
Not necessarily. It's more about building a relationship with the horse, learning to communicate with it, working through challenges together. It can be incredibly therapeutic, especially for people who've experienced trauma.
So it sounds like Aspen Intervention is really trying to provide this comprehensive toolkit for people in recovery, not just focusing on the addiction itself, but really equipping them with these skills and practices that can support their overall well-being.
Exactly. It's about addressing those root causes of addiction, not just the symptoms.
And this whole person approach seems to resonate with that concept of post-traumatic growth too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that even in the face of adversity, there's this potential for profound transformation.
It's not just about surviving, it's about thriving.
Exactly. It's about using the challenges we face, however painful they might be, as opportunities to learn, grow, and become more resilient versions of ourselves.
And that's a message that really applies to everyone, right? Not just people who've struggled with addiction.
I completely agree. These principles, meaning making, mindfulness, self-care, resilience, these are all so relevant for navigating any kind of life challenge.
It's almost like a shift in perspective, isn't it? Instead of seeing challenges as setbacks, we can choose to view them as these opportunities for growth and transformation.
Mm.
And it doesn't minimize the difficulty, but it can give us this sense of hope and agency.
I love that. It's about reclaiming our power and recognizing that we have a choice in how we respond to adversity.
So for our listener out there who's maybe, exploring these ideas of addiction recovery and personal growth, what are some of the key takeaways they can glean from our conversation today?
Well, I think one of the most important takeaways is that challenges aren't failures. They're opportunities for growth and learning.
And that we have more agency than we might realize in shaping our experiences and responses to those challenges.
Exactly. And I think another crucial takeaway is the importance of self-care and self-compassion, especially during those tough times. Taking care of ourselves, both physically and emotionally, is essential for building that resilience and navigating life's ups and downs.
It's also important to remember that we don't have to go through it alone. Reaching out for support, whether it's from friends, family, therapist support groups, it can make all the difference. There is strength in vulnerability.
Absolutely. And finally, I think it's important to remember that the journey towards healing and growth isn't always a straight line. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when it feels like you're taking two steps back for every one step forward.
But those setbacks, they don't define us. They're just part of the process.
Exactly. It's about having the courage to keep moving forward one step at a time and celebrating those small victories along the way.
This is giving me so much to think about. We've been talking about addiction, but these principles really apply to any area of life where we're seeking growth or healing or simply, a greater sense of meaning and purpose.
You're absolutely right. It all comes back to this fundamental human need to understand ourselves, connect with something larger than ourselves, and create a life that feels authentic and fulfilling.
So before we wrap up, I want to kind of circle back to something we discussed earlier about, recovery isn't just about stopping that harmful behavior. It's also about addressing those underlying thoughts, patterns, and unmet needs that contributed to it in the first place.
That's such a crucial point. It's about, going beyond that surface level and really understanding the root causes of our behavior.
Right. And one of the sources mentioned that the importance of these evaluative insight processes, which I think is just a fancy way of saying self-reflection, right?
Exactly. It's about developing that ability to step back, observe our thoughts and emotions, and identify the patterns that are driving our choices.
And mindfulness plays a key role in that process,
And
right?
absolutely. Mindfulness really helps us create that space between our thoughts and our actions, allowing us to respond to situations with more, clarity and wisdom rather than just reacting impulsively.
So it's not just about stopping the substance use. It's about developing this whole new way of being in the world, one that's grounded in self-awareness, compassion, and resilience.
That's beautifully said. It's about cultivating this sense of inner peace and well-being that can sustain us through all of life's inevitable ups and downs.
And this shift in perspective, this deeper understanding of ourselves, it can have these ripple effects in all areas of our lives, our relationships, our work, our overall sense of purpose and fulfillment.
Couldn't agree more. It's about creating a more authentic, meaningful, and joyful life. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves, even in the face of adversity.
It's pretty inspiring to think about how much potential for growth and transformation lies within each of us. Even when things are tough, we have this capacity to heal, learn, and evolve.
That's such a powerful message. It reminds us that challenges, even when they're incredibly difficult, can be these opportunities for us to become more resilient, more compassionate, more whole.
This deep dive has really highlighted how interconnected our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being really are.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we're not just these separate parts, but we're integrated beings. And true well-being involves nurturing all those aspects of ourselves.
And it's a reminder that the journey towards healing and growth, it's
Mhm.
not always linear. It's a process filled with ups and downs, setbacks and breakthroughs.
Exactly. It's about embracing that journey with patience, self-compassion, and a willingness to learn and grow along the way.
It's amazing how this conversation keeps coming back to the idea of choice. We may not get to choose the challenges we face in life, but we always have a choice about how we respond to them.
Absolutely. It's so easy to feel powerless when you're facing something like addiction or any kind of hardship, really.
Right?
But, as we've been talking about today, there's real power in recognizing our agency, in realizing that we can actively participate in our own healing.
I think that's so important. It's not about pretending like everything's fine or minimizing the struggles that people go through, but it's more about recognizing that even in the midst of those struggles, there can be these opportunities for growth and transformation.
And that's what I found so inspiring about the sources that you shared. They don't shy away from the pain and the difficulty of addiction, but they also highlight the incredible resilience of the human spirit.
It's a really hopeful way of looking at things, I think, both for those who are in recovery and really for anyone facing adversity.
Definitely. You know, one thing that really struck me was how much emphasis there was on the whole person.
Yes.
Like, it's not just about treating the addiction, but it's about tending to the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of the individual.
Right. And I think that's what we were talking about earlier with the Aspen Intervention Wellness Center and how they incorporate yoga, tai chi, even equine therapy as part of their treatment program. It's
It'll
like
slay.
they're really trying to address the underlying causes of addiction rather than just focusing on those surface level symptoms.
Right. It's a recognition that we're not just a collection of parts. We're these integrated beings. And true healing often requires a much more holistic approach.
I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. So as we wrap up this deep dive today, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners? What do you hope they walk away with?
Well, for me, I hope people walk away understanding that challenges, as difficult as they can also be incredible catalysts for growth. They force us to re-examine our priorities, to connect with our values, and ultimately to create a more meaningful life.
I think that's so well said. And, it's important to remember that the journey isn't always linear.
Right.
There will be setbacks on the way. There will be moments of doubt.
Absolutely.
But every step toward healing, every moment of self-care, every act of self-discovery, it's a victory worth celebrating.
I love that. And I would also add that, we don't have to do this alone. Reaching out for support, whether it's professional help or a support group, or even just talking to a trusted friend or family member, there's so much strength in allowing others to support us in that journey.
Absolutely. And, especially for those who are struggling out there, I think that's such an important message to remember. You are not alone. There's help available. And beyond that, there's hope.
I completely agree. And even if our listeners haven't personally struggled with addiction, I hope they walk away with a deeper appreciation for that resilience of the human spirit and the power that we all have to choose growth even when things are tough.
This deep dive has been so thought-provoking, and I'm really grateful for all of your insights today. It's amazing how exploring one topic can lead us to this broader conversation about life, about resilience, about the potential for transformation that exists within each of us.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? The interconnectedness of everything.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We'll be back next week with a brand new topic to explore. Until then, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep believing in your own capacity for transformation.